You're listening to a collection of 5 Henry stories, presented by the Talking Book, your daily stop for stories. Sisters of the Golden Circle. The Rubberneck Auto was about ready to start. The merry top riders had been assigned to their seats by the gentlemanly conductor. The sidewalk was blockaded with sightseers who had gathered to stare at sightseers, justifying the natural law that every creature on earth is preyed upon by some other creature. The megaphone man raised his instrument of torture. The inside of the great automobile began to thump and throb like the heart of a coffee drinker. The top riders nervously clung to the seats. The old lady from Valparaiso, Indiana, shrieked to be put ashore. But before a wheel turns, listen to a brief preamble through the cardiophone, which shall point out to you an object of interest on life's sightseeing tour. Swift and comprehensive is the recognition of white man for white man in African wilds. Instant and sure is the spiritual greeting between mother and babe. Unhesitatingly do master and dog commune across the slight gulf between animal and man. Immeasurably quick and sapient are the brief messages between one and one's beloved. But all these instances set forth only slow and groping interchange of sympathy and thought beside one other instance which the rubberneck coach shall disclose. You shall learn, if you have not learned already, what two beings of all Earth's living inhabitants most quickly look into each other's hearts and souls when they meet face to face. The gong whirred, and the glaring at Gotham car moved majestically upon its instructive tour. On the highest rear seat was James Williams of Cloverdale, Missouri, and his bride. Capitalize it, friend typo, that last word. Word of words in the epiphany of life and love. The scent of the flowers, the booty of the bee, the primal drip of spring waters, the overture of the lark, the twist of lemon peel on the cocktail of creation, such is the bride. Holy is the wife, revered the mother, Galiptius is the summer girl. But the bride is the certified check among the wedding presents that the gods send in when man is married to mortality. The car glided up the Golden Way. On the bridge of the great cruiser, the captain stood, trumpeting the sights of the big city to his passengers. Wide-mouthed and open-eared, they heard the sights of the metropolis thundered forth to their eyes. Confused, delirious with excitement and provincial longings, they tried to make ocular responses to the megaphonic ritual. In the solemn spires of spreading cathedrals, they saw the home of the Vanderbilts. In the busy bulk of the Grand Central Depot, they viewed, wonderingly, the frugal cot of Russell Sage. Bidden to observe the highlands of the Hudson, they gaped, unsuspecting, at the upturned mountains of a new-laid sewer. To many, the elevated railroad was the Rialto, on the stations of which uniformed men sat and made chop suey of your tickets. And to this day in the outlying districts many have it that Chuck Connors, with his hand on his heart, leads reform, and that but for the noble municipal efforts of one Parkhurst, a district attorney, the notorious Bishop Potter gang would have destroyed law and order from the Bowery to the Harlem River. But I beg you to observe Mrs. James Williams, Hattie Chalmers that was, once the belle of Cloverdale. Pale blue is the bride's, if she will, and this colour she had honoured. Willingly had the moss rosebud loaned to her cheeks of its pink, and as for the violet, her eyes will do very well as they are, thank you. A useless strip of white chaff, oh no, he was guiding the autocar, of white chiffon, or perhaps it was grenadine or tulle, was tied beneath her chin, pretending to hold her bonnet in place. But you know as well as I do that the hat pins did the work. And on Mrs. James Williams's face was recorded a little library of the world's best thoughts in 3 volumes. Volume number 1 contained the belief that James Williams was about the right sort of thing. Volume number 2 was an essay on the world, declaring it to be a very excellent place. Volume number 3 disclosed the belief that in occupying the highest seat in a rubberneck auto, they were traveling the pace that passes all understanding. James Williams, you would have guessed, was about 24. It will gratify you to know that your estimate was so accurate. He was exactly 23 years, 11 months, and 29 days old. He was well-built, active, strong-jawed, good-natured, and rising. He was on his wedding trip. Dear kind fairy, please cut out those orders for money and 40 HP touring cars and fame and a new growth of hair and the presidency of the boat club. Instead of any of them, turn backward. Oh, turn backward and give us just a teeny-weeny bit of our wedding trip over again. Just an hour, dear fairy, so we can remember how the grass and poplar trees looked, and the bow of those bonnet strings tied beneath her chin, even if it was the hatpins that did the work. Can't do it? Very well, hurry up with that touring car and the oil stock then. Just in front of Mrs. James Williams sat a girl in a loose tan jacket and a straw hat adorned with grapes and roses. Only in dreams and milliners' shops do we, alas, gather grapes and roses at one swipe. This girl gazed with large blue eyes, credulous when the megaphone man roared his doctrine that millionaires were things about which we should be concerned. Between blasts, she resorted to Epictetan philosophy in the form of pepsin chewing gum. At this girl's right hand sat a young man about 24. He was well-built, active, strong-jawed and good-natured. But if his description seems to follow that of James Williams, divested of anything Cloverdalian. This man belonged to hard streets and sharp corners. He looked keenly about him, seeming to begrudge the asphalt under the feet of those upon whom he looked down from his perch. While the megaphone barks at a famous hostelry, let me whisper you through the low-tuned cardiophone to sit tight. For now things are about to happen, and the great city will close over them again as over a scrap of ticker tape floating down from the den of a Broad Street bear. The girl in the tan jacket twisted around to view the pilgrims on the last seat. The other passengers she had absorbed. The seat behind her was her Bluebeard's chamber. Her eyes met those of Mrs. James Williams. Between two ticks of a watch, they exchanged their life's experiences, histories, hopes, and fancies, and all, mind you, with the eye, before two men could have decided whether to draw steel or borrow a match. The bride leaned forward low. She and the girl spoke rapidly together, their tongues moving quickly like those of two serpents, a comparison that is not meant to go further. 2 smiles and a dozen nods closed the conference, and now in the broad, quiet avenue in front of the rubberneck car, a man in dark clothes stood with uplifted hand. From the sidewalk another hurried to join him. The girl in the fruitful hat quickly seized her companion by the arm and whispered in his ear. That young man exhibited proof of ability to act promptly. Crouching low, he slid over the edge of the car, hung lightly for an instant, and then disappeared. Half a dozen of the top riders observed his feat, wonderingly, but made no comment, deeming it prudent not to express surprise at what might be the conventional manner of alighting in this bewildering city. The truant passenger dodged a hansom and then floated past, like a leaf on a stream between a furniture van and a florist's delivery wagon. The girl in the tan jacket turned again and looked in the eyes of Mrs. James Williams. Then she faced about and sat still while the rubberneck auto stopped at the flash of the badge under the coat of the plainclothes man. "What's eaten you?" demanded the megaphonist, abandoning his professional discourse for pure English. "Keep her at anchor for a minute," ordered the officer. "There's a man on board we want, a Philadelphia burglar called Pinky Maguire. There he is on the back seat. Look out for the side, Donovan." Donovan went to the hind wheel and looked up at James Williams. "Come down, old sport," he said pleasantly. "We've got you. Back to Sleepytown for yours. It ain't a bad idea, hiding on a rubberneck, though. I'll remember that." Softly through the megaphone came the advice of the conductor. "Better step off, sir, and explain. The car must proceed on its tour." James Williams belonged among the level heads. With necessary slowness, he picked his way through the passengers down to the steps at the front of the car. His wife followed, but she first turned her eyes and saw the escaped tourist glide from behind the furniture van and slip behind a tree on the edge of the little park, not 50 feet away. Descended to the ground, James Williams faced his captors with a smile. He was thinking what a good story he would have to tell in Cloverdale about having been mistaken for a burglar. The rubberneck coach lingered, out of respect for its patrons. What could be a more interesting sight than this? "My name is James Williams of Cloverdale, Missouri," he said kindly, so that they would not be too greatly mortified. "I have letters here that will show—" "You'll come with us, please," announced the plainclothes man. "Pinky Maguire's description fits you like flannel washed in hot suds. A detective saw you on the rubberneck up at Central Park and phoned down to take you in. Do your explaining at the station house." James Williams's wife, his bride of 2 weeks, looked him in the face with a strange, soft radiance in her eyes and a flush on her cheeks, looked him in the face and said, "Go with them quietly, Pinky, and maybe it'll be in your favor." And then, as the glaring at Gotham car rolled away, she turned and threw a kiss, his wife threw a kiss, at someone high up on the seats of the rubberneck. "Your girl gives you good advice, Maguire," said Donovan. "Come on now." And then madness descended upon and occupied James Williams. He pushed his hat far upon the back of his head. "My wife seems to think I'm a burglar," he said recklessly. "I never heard of her being crazy, therefore I must be. And if I'm crazy, they can't do anything to me for killing you two fools in my madness." Whereupon he resisted arrest so cheerfully and industriously that cops had to be whistled for, and afterwards the reserves to disperse a few thousand delighted spectators. At the station house, the desk sergeant asked for his name. "McDoodle, the Pink, or Pinky the Brute, I forget which," was James Williams's answer. "But you can bet I'm a burglar. Don't leave that out. And you might add that it took 5 of them to pluck the Pink. I'd especially like to have that in the records." In an hour came Mrs. James Williams with Uncle Thomas of Madison Avenue in a respect-compelling motor car and proofs of the hero's innocence, for all the world like the third act of a drama backed by an automobile manufacturer, Co. After the police had sternly reprimanded James Williams for imitating a copyrighted burglar and given him as honorable a discharge as the department was capable of, Mrs. Williams rearrested him and swept him into an angle of the station house. James Williams regarded her with one eye. He always said that Donovan closed the other while somebody was holding his good right hand. Never before had he given her a word of reproach or of reproof. "If you can explain," he began rather stiffly, "why you—" "Dear," she interrupted, "listen, it was an hour's pain and trial to you. I did it for her. I mean the girl who spoke to me on the coach. I was so happy, Jim, so happy with you that I didn't dare to refuse that happiness to another. Jim, they were married only this morning, those two, and I wanted him to get away. While they were struggling with you, I saw him slip from behind his tree and hurry across the park. That's all of it, dear. I had to do it." Thus does one sister of the plain gold band know another who stands in the enchanted light that shines but once and briefly for each one. By rice and satin bows does mere man become aware of weddings, but bride knoweth bride at the glance of an eye, and between them swiftly passes comfort and meaning in a language that man and widows wot not of. The Romance of a Busy Broker. Pitcher, confidential clerk in the office of Harvey Maxwell Broker, allowed a look of mild interest and surprise to visit his usually expressionless countenance when his employer briskly entered at 9:30 in company with his young lady stenographer. With a snappy, "Good morning, Pitcher," Maxwell dashed at his desk as though he were intending to leap over it, and then plunged into the great heap of letters and telegrams waiting there for him. The young lady had been Maxwell's stenographer for a year. She was beautiful in a way that was decidedly unstenographic. She forewent the pomp of the alluring pompadour. She wore no chains, bracelets, or lockets. She had not the air of being about to accept an invitation to luncheon. Her dress was grey and plain, but it fitted her figure with fidelity and discretion. In her neat black turban hat was the gold-green wing of a macaw. On this morning she was softly and shyly radiant. Her eyes were dreamily bright, her cheeks genuine peach-blow, her expression a happy one, tinged with reminiscence. Pitcher, still mildly curious, noticed a difference in her ways this morning. Instead of going straight into the adjoining room where her desk was, she lingered, slightly irresolute, in the outer office. Once she moved over by Maxwell's desk, near enough for him to be aware of her presence. The machine sitting at that desk was no longer a man. It was a busy New York broker, moved by buzzing wheels and uncoiling springs. "Well, what is it? Anything?" asked Maxwell sharply. His opened mail lay like a bank of stage snow on his crowded desk. His keen grey eye, impersonal and brusque, flashed upon her half impatiently. "Nothing," answered the stenographer, moving away with a little smile. "Mr. Pitcher," she said to the confidential clerk, "did Mr. Maxwell say anything yesterday about engaging another stenographer?" "He did," answered Pitcher. "He told me to get another one. I notified the agency yesterday afternoon to send over a few samples this morning. It's 9:45 o'clock and not a single picture hat or piece of pineapple chewing gum has showed up yet." "I will do the work as usual then," said the young lady, "until someone comes to fill the place." And she went to her desk at once and hung the black turban hat with the gold-green macaw wing in its accustomed place. He who has been denied the spectacle of a busy Manhattan broker during a rush of business is handicapped for the profession of anthropology. The poet sings of the crowded hour of glorious life. The broker's hour is not only crowded, but the minutes and seconds are hanging to all the straps and packing both front and rear platforms. And this day was Harvey Maxwell's busy day. The ticker began to reel out jerkily its fitful coils of tape. The desk telephone had a chronic attack of buzzing. Men began to throng into the office and call at him over the railing, jovially, sharply, viciously, excitedly. Messenger boys ran in and out with messages and telegrams. The clerks in the office jumped about like sailors during a storm. Even Pitcher's face relaxed into something resembling animation. On the exchange there were hurricanes and landslides and snowstorms and glaciers and volcanoes, and those elemental disturbances were reproduced in miniature in the broker's offices. Maxwell shoved his chair against the wall and transacted business after the manner of a toe dancer. He jumped from ticker to phone, from desk to door, with the trained agility of a harlequin. In the midst of this growing and important stress, the broker became suddenly aware of a high-rolled fringe of golden hair under a nodding canopy of velvet and ostrich tips, an imitation sealskin sack, and a string of beads as large as hickory nuts, ending near the floor with a silver heart. There was a self-possessed young lady connected with these accessories, and Pitcher was there to construe her. "Lady from the stenographer's agency to see about the position," said Pitcher. Maxwell turned half around with his hands full of papers and ticker tape. "What position?" he asked with a frown. "Position of stenographer," said Pitcher. "You told me yesterday to call them up and have one sent over this morning." "You are losing your mind, Pitcher," said Maxwell. "Why should I have given you any such instructions? Miss Leslie has given perfect satisfaction during the year she has been here. The place is hers as long as she chooses to retain it. There's no place open here, madam. Countermand that order with the agency, Pitcher, and don't bring any more of them in here." The silver heart left the office, swinging and banging itself independently against the office furniture as it indignantly departed. Pitcher seized a moment to remark to the bookkeeper that the old man seemed to get more absent-minded and forgetful every day of the world. The rush and pace of business grew fiercer and faster. On the floor they were pounding half a dozen stocks in which Maxwell's customers were heavy investors. Orders to buy and sell were coming and going as swift as the flight of swallows. Some of his own holdings were imperiled, and the man was working like some high-geared, delicate, strong machine, strung to full tension, going at full speed, accurate, never hesitating, with the proper word and decision and act ready and prompt as clockwork. Stocks and bonds, loans and mortgages, margins and securities. Here was a world of finance, and there was no room in it for the human world or the world of nature. When the luncheon hour drew near, there came a slight lull in the uproar. Maxwell stood by his desk with his hands full of telegrams and memoranda, with a fountain pen over his right ear and his hair hanging in disorderly strings over his forehead. His window was open, for the beloved janitress Spring had turned on a little warmth through the waking registers of the earth, and through the window came a wandering, perhaps a lost odor, a delicate, sweet odor of lilac that fixed the broker for a moment immovable. For this odor belonged to Miss Leslie. It was her own and hers only. The odor brought her vividly, almost tangibly before him. The world of finance dwindled suddenly to a speck, and she was in the next room, 20 steps away. "By George, I'll do it now," said Maxwell half aloud. "I'll ask her now. I wonder I didn't do it long ago." He dashed into the inner office with the haste of a short trying to cover. He charged upon the desk of the stenographer. She looked up at him with a smile. A soft pink crept over her cheek, and her eyes were kind and frank. Maxwell leaned one elbow on her desk. He still clutched fluttering papers with both hands, and the pen was above his ear. "Miss Leslie," he began hurriedly, "I have but a moment to spare. I want to say something in that moment. Will you be my wife? I haven't had time to make love to you in the ordinary way, but I really do love you. Talk quick, please. Those fellows are clubbing the stuffing out of Union Pacific." "Oh, what are you talking about?" exclaimed the young lady. She rose to her feet and gazed upon him round-eyed. "Don't you understand?" said Maxwell restively. "I want you to marry me. I love you, Miss Leslie. I wanted to tell you, and I snatched a minute when things had slackened up a bit. They're calling me for the phone now. Tell them to wait a minute, Pitcher. Won't you, Miss Leslie?" The stenographer acted very queerly. At first, she seemed overcome with amazement. Then tears flowed from her wondering eyes, and then she smiled sunnily through them, and one of her arms slid tenderly about the broker's neck. "I know now," she said softly. "It's this old business that has driven everything else out of your head for the time. I was frightened at first. Don't you remember, Harvey? We were married last evening at 8 o'clock in the little church around the corner. After 20 years." The policeman on the beat moved up the avenue impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show, for spectators were few. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night, but chilly gusts of wind with a taste of rain in them had well nigh depeopled the streets. Trying doors as he went, twirling his club with many intricate and artful movements, turning now and then to cast his watchful eye adown the Pacific thoroughfare, the officer, with his stalwart form and slight swagger, made a fine picture of a guardian of the peace. The vicinity was one that kept early hours. Now and then you might see the lights of a cigar store or of an all-night lunch counter, but the majority of the doors belonged to business places that had long since been closed. When about midway of a certain block, the policeman suddenly slowed his walk. In the doorway of a darkened hardware store, a man leaned with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. "It's all right, officer," he said, reassuringly. "I'm just waiting for a friend. It's an appointment made 20 years ago. Sounds a little funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I'll explain if you'd like to make certain it's all straight. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands. Big Joe Brady's restaurant." "Until 5 years ago," said the policeman. "It was torn down then." The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond, oddly set. "20 years ago tonight," said the man, "I dined here at Big Joe Brady's with Jimmy Wells, my best chum and the finest chap in the world. He and I were raised here in New York, just like two brothers together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning I was to start for the West to make my fortune. You couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. Well, we agreed that night that we would meet here again exactly 20 years from that date and time, no matter what our conditions might be or from what distance we might have to come. We figured that in 20 years, each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made, whatever they were going to be." "It sounds pretty interesting," said the policeman. "Rather a long time between meets, though, it seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friend since you left?" "Well, yes, for a time we corresponded," said the other. "But after a year or two we lost track of each other. You see, the West is a pretty big proposition, and I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. But I know Jimmy will meet me here if he's alive, for he always was the truest, stanchest old chap in the world. He'll never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand in this door tonight, and it's worth it if my old partner turns up." The waiting man pulled out a handsome watch, the lids of it set with small diamonds. 3 minutes to 10, he announced. "It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted here at the restaurant door." "Did pretty well out west, didn't you?" asked the policeman. "You bet. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a kind of plodder, though, good fellow as he was. I've had to compete with some of the sharpest wits going to get my pile. A man gets in a groove in New York. It takes the West to put a razor edge on him." The policeman twirled his club and took a step or two. "I'll be on my way. Hope your friend comes around all right. Going to call time on him sharp?" "I should say not," said the other. "I'll give him half an hour at least. If Jimmy is alive on Earth, he'll be here by that time. So long, officer." "Good night, sir," said the policeman, passing on along his beat, trying doors as he went. There was now a fine, cold drizzle falling, and the wind had risen from its uncertain puffs into a steady blow. The few foot passengers astir in that quarter hurried dismally and silently along with coat collars turned high and pocketed hands. And in the door of the hardware store the man who had come 1,000 miles to fill an appointment, uncertain almost to absurdity, with the friend of his youth, smoked his cigar and waited. About 20 minutes he waited, and then a tall man in a long overcoat with collar turned up to his ears hurried across from the opposite side of the street. He went directly to the waiting man. "Is that you, Bob?" he asked doubtfully. "Is that you, Jimmy Wells?" cried the man in the door. "Bless my heart!" exclaimed the new arrival, grasping both the other's hands with his own. "It's Bob, sure as fate. I was certain I'd find you here if you were still in existence. Well, well, 20 years is a long time. The old restaurant's gone, Bob. I wish it had lasted, so we could have had another dinner there. How has the West treated you, old man? Bully. It has given me everything I asked it for. You've changed lots, Jimmy. I never thought you were so tall by 2 or 3 inches. Oh, I grew a bit after I was 20. Doing well in New York, Jimmy? Moderately. I have a position in one of the city departments. Come on, Bob. We'll go around to a place I know of and have a good long talk about old times. The two men started up the street, arm in arm. The man from the West, his egotism enlarged by success, was beginning to outline the history of his career. The other, submerged in his overcoat, listened with interest. At the corner stood a drugstore, brilliant with electric lights. When they came into this glare, each of them turned simultaneously to gaze upon the other's face. The man from the West stopped suddenly and released his arm. "You're not Jimmy Wells," he snapped. 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change a man's nose from a Roman to a pug." "It sometimes changes a good man into a bad one," said the tall man. "You've been under arrest for 10 minutes, Silky Bob. Chicago thinks you may have dropped over our way and wires us she wants to have a chat with you. Going quietly, are you? That's sensible. Now, before we go on to the station, here's a note I was asked to hand you. You may read it here at the window. It's from Patrolman Wells." The man from the West unfolded the little piece of paper handed him. His hand was steady when he began to read, but it trembled a little by the time he had finished. The note was rather short. "Bob, I was at the appointed place on time. When you struck the match to light your cigar, I saw it was the face of the man wanted in Chicago. Somehow I couldn't do it myself, so I went around and got a plainclothesman to do the job. Jimmy. Lost on dress parade." Mr. Towers Chandler was pressing his evening suit in his hall bedroom. One iron was heating on a small gas stove. The other was being pushed vigorously back and forth to make the desirable crease that would be seen later on, extending in straight lines from Mr. Chandler's patent leather shoes to the edge of his low-cut vest. So much of the hero's toilet may be entrusted to our confidence. The remainder may be guessed by those whom genteel poverty has driven to ignoble expedient. Our next view of him shall be as he descends the steps of his lodging-house immaculately and correctly clothed, calm, assured, handsome, in appearance the typical New York young clubman setting out slightly bored to inaugurate the pleasures of the evening. Chandler's honorarium was $18 per week. He was employed in the office of an architect. He was 22 years old. He considered architecture to be truly an art, and he honestly believed, though he would not have dared to admit it in New York, that the Flatiron Building was inferior in design to the great cathedral in Milan. Out of each week's earnings, Chandler set aside $1. At the end of each 10 weeks, with the extra capital thus accumulated, he purchased one gentleman's evening from the bargain counter of stingy old Father Time. He arrayed himself in the regalia of millionaires and presidents. He took himself to the quarter where life is brightest and showiest, and there dined with taste and luxury. With $10, a man may, for a few hours, play the wealthy idler to perfection. The sum is ample for a well-considered meal, a bottle bearing a respectable label, commensurate tips, a smoke, cab fare, and the ordinary etceteras. This one delectable evening culled from each dull 70 was to Chandler a source of renascent bliss. To the society bud comes but one debut. It stands alone, sweet in her memory when her hair has whitened. But to Chandler each 10 weeks brought a joy as keen, as thrilling, as new as the first had been. To sit among bon vivants under palms in the swirl of concealed music, to look upon the habitués of such a paradise and to be looked upon by them. What is a girl's first dance and short-sleeved tulle compared with this? Up Broadway, Chandler moved with the vespertine dress parade. For this evening, he was an exhibit as well as a gazer. For the next 69 evenings, he would be dining in Cheviot and worsted at dubious table d'hôte, at whirlwind lunch counters, on sandwiches and beer in his hall bedroom. He was willing to do that, for he was a true son of the great city of razzle-dazzle, and to him one evening in the limelight made up for many dark ones. Chandler protracted his walk until the 40s began to intersect the great and glittering Primrose Way, for the evening was yet young, and when one is of the beau monde only one day in 70, One loves to protract the pleasure. Eyes bright, sinister, curious, admiring, provocative, alluring were bent upon him, for his garb and air proclaimed him a devotee to the hour of solace and pleasure. At a certain corner he came to a standstill, proposing to himself the question of turning back toward the showy and fashionable restaurant in which he usually dined on the evenings of his especial luxury. Just then a girl scuttled lightly around the corner, slipped on a patch of icy snow, and fell plump upon the sidewalk. Chandler assisted her to her feet with instant and solicitous courtesy. The girl hobbled to the wall of the building, leaned against it, and thanked him demurely. "I think my ankle is strained," she said. "It twisted when I fell." "Does it pain you much?" inquired Chandler. "Only when I rest my weight upon it. I think I will be able to walk in a minute or two." "If I can be of any further service," suggested the young man, "I will call a cab or—" "Thank you," said the girl, softly but heartily. "I am sure you need not trouble yourself any further. It was so awkward of me. And my shoe heels are horridly common sense. I can't blame them at all." Chandler looked at the girl and found her swiftly drawing his interest. She was pretty in a refined way, and her eye was both merry and kind. She was inexpensively clothed in a plain black dress that suggested a sort of uniform such as shop girls wear. Her glossy dark brown hair showed its coils beneath a cheap hat of black straw whose only ornament was a velvet ribbon and bow. She could have posed as a model for the self-respecting working girl of the best type. A sudden idea came into the head of the young architect. He would ask this girl to dine with him. Here was the element that his splendid but solitary periodic feasts had lacked. His brief season of elegant luxury would be doubly enjoyable if he could add to it a lady's society. This girl was a lady, he was sure. Her manner and speech settled that. And in spite of her extremely plain attire, he felt that he would be pleased to sit at table with her. These thoughts passed swiftly through his mind, and he decided to ask her. It was a breach of etiquette, of course, but oftentimes wage-earning girls waived formalities in matters of this kind. They were generally shrewd judges of men, and thought better of their own judgment than they did of useless conventions. His $10, discreetly expended, would enable the two to dine very well indeed. The dinner would no doubt be a wonderful experience thrown into the dull routine of the girl's life, and her lively appreciation of it would add to his own triumph and pleasure. "I think," he said to her with frank gravity, "that your foot needs a longer rest than you suppose. Now, I am going to suggest a way in which you can give it that, and at the same time do me a favor. I was on my way to dine all by my lonely self when you came tumbling around the corner. You come with me and we'll have a cozy dinner and a pleasant talk together. And by that time, your game ankle will carry you home very nicely, I am sure." The girl looked quickly up into Chandler's clear, pleasant countenance. Her eyes twinkled once very brightly, and then she smiled ingenuously. "But we don't know each other. It wouldn't be right, would it?" she said doubtfully. "There is nothing wrong about it," said the young man candidly. "I'll introduce myself. Permit me. Mr. Towers Chandler. After our dinner, which I will try to make as pleasant as possible, I will bid you good evening, or attend you safely to your door, whichever you prefer." "But dear me," said the girl, with a glance at Chandler's faultless attire, "in this old dress and hat." "Never mind that," said Chandler cheerfully. "I'm sure you look more charming in them than anyone we shall see in the most elaborate dinner toilette." "My ankle does hurt yet," admitted the girl, attempting a limping step. "I think I will accept your invitation, Mr. Chandler. You may call me Miss Marion." "Come then, Miss Marion," said the young architect gaily, but with perfect courtesy. "You will not have far to walk. There is a very respectable and good restaurant in the next block. You will have to lean on my arm, so, and walk slowly. It is lonely dining all by oneself. I'm just a little bit glad that you slipped on the ice." When the two were established at a well-appointed table, with a promising waiter hovering in attendance, Chandler began to experience the real joy that his regular outing always brought to him. The restaurant was not so showy or pretentious as the one further down Broadway, which he always preferred, but it was nearly so. The tables were well filled with prosperous-looking diners. There was a good orchestra, playing softly enough to make conversation a possible pleasure. and the cuisine and service were beyond criticism. His companion, even in her cheap hat and dress, held herself with an air that added distinction to the natural beauty of her face and figure. And it is certain that she looked at Chandler, with his animated but self-possessed manner and his kindling and frank blue eyes, with something not far from admiration in her own charming face. Then it was that the madness of Manhattan, the frenzy of fuss and feathers, the bacillus of brag, the provincial plague of pose seized upon Towers Chandler. He was on Broadway, surrounded by pomp and style, and there were eyes to look at him. On the stage of that comedy, he had assumed to play the one-night part of a butterfly of fashion and an idler of means and taste. He was dressed for the part, and all his good angels had not the power to prevent him from acting it. So he began to prate to Miss Marion of clubs, of teas, of golf and riding and kennels and cotillions and tours abroad, and threw out hints of a yacht lying at Larchmont. He could see that she was vastly impressed by this vague talk, so he endorsed his pose by random insinuations concerning great wealth, and mentioned familiarly a few names that are handled reverently by the proletariat. It was Chandler's short little day, and he was wringing from it the best that could be had as he saw it. And yet once or twice he saw the pure gold of this girl shine through the mist that his egotism had raised between him and all objects. "This way of living that you speak of," she said, "sounds so futile and purposeless. Haven't you any work to do in the world that might interest you more?" "My dear Miss Marion," he exclaimed, "work! Think of dressing every day for dinner, of making half a dozen calls in an afternoon, with a policeman at every corner ready to jump into your auto and take you to the station if you get up any greater speed than a donkey cart's gait. We do-nothings are the hardest workers in the land." The dinner was concluded, the waiter generously fed, and the two walked out to the corner where they had met. Miss Marion walked very well now. Her limp was scarcely noticeable. "Thank you for a nice time," she said frankly. "I must run home now. I liked the dinner very much, Mr. Chandler." He shook hands with her, smiling cordially, and said something about a game of bridge at his club. He watched her for a moment, walking rather rapidly eastward, and then he found a cab to drive him slowly homeward. In his chilly bedroom, Chandler laid away his evening clothes for a 69 days' rest. He went about it thoughtfully. "That was a stunning girl," he said to himself. "She's all right, too, I'd be sworn, even if she does have to work. Perhaps if I'd told her the truth instead of all that razzle-dazzle, we might. But confound it, I had to play up to my clothes." Thus spoke the brave who was born and reared in the wigwams of the tribe of the Manhattans. The girl, after leaving her entertainer, sped swiftly cross town until she arrived at a handsome and sedate mansion 2 squares to the east, facing on that avenue which is the highway of Mammon and the auxiliary gods. Here she entered hurriedly and ascended to a room where a handsome young lady in an elaborate house dress was looking anxiously out the window. "Oh, you madcap!" exclaimed the elder girl when the other entered. "When will you quit frightening us this way? It is 2 hours since you ran out in that rag of an old dress and Marie's hat. Mamma has been so alarmed. She sent Louis in the auto to try to find you. You are a bad, thoughtless puss." The elder girl touched a button and a maid came in a moment. "Marie, tell Mamma that Miss Marion has returned." "Don't scold, sister. I only ran down to Madame Théo's to tell her to use mauve insertion instead of pink. My costume and Marie's hat were just what I needed. Everyone thought I was a shop girl, I am sure." "Dinner is over, dear. You stayed so late." "I know. I slipped on the sidewalk and turned my ankle. I could not walk, so I hobbled into a restaurant and sat there until I was better. That is why I was so long." The 2 girls sat in the window seat, looking out at the lights and the stream of hurrying vehicles in the avenue. The younger one cuddled down with her head in her sister's lap. "We will have to marry some day," she said dreamily. "Both of us. We have so much money that we will not be allowed to disappoint the public. Do you want me to tell you the kind of a man I could love, sis?" "Go on, you scatterbrain," smiled the other. "I could love a man with dark and kind blue eyes, who is gentle and respectful to poor girls, who is handsome and good and does not try to flirt. But I could love him only if he had an ambition, an object, some work to do in the world. I would not care how poor he was if I could help him build his way up. But, sister dear, the kind of man we always meet, the man who lives an idle life between society and his clubs, I could not love a man like that, even if his eyes were blue and he were ever so kind to poor girls whom he met in the street. By courier. It was neither the season nor the hour when the park had frequenters, and it is likely that the young lady who was seated on one of the benches at the side of the walk had merely obeyed a sudden impulse to sit for a while and enjoy a foretaste of coming spring. She rested there, pensive and still. A certain melancholy that touched her countenance must have been of recent birth, for it had not yet altered the fine and youthful contours of her cheek, nor subdued the arch though resolute curve of her lips. A tall young man came striding through the park along the path near which she sat. Behind him tagged a boy carrying a suitcase. At sight of the young lady, the man's face changed to red and back to pale again. He watched her countenance as he drew nearer, with hope and anxiety mingled on his own. He passed within a few yards of her, but he saw no evidence that she was aware of his presence or existence. Some 50 yards further on, he suddenly stopped and sat on a bench at one side. The boy dropped the suitcase and stared at him with wondering, shrewd eyes. The young man took out his handkerchief and wiped his brow. It was a good handkerchief, a good brow, and the young man was good to look at. He said to the boy, "I want you to take a message to that young lady on that bench. Tell her I am on my way to the station to leave for San Francisco, where I shall join that Alaska moose hunting expedition. Tell her that since she has commanded me neither to speak nor to write to her, I take this means of making one last appeal to her sense of justice for the sake of what has been. Tell her that to condemn and discard one who has not deserved such treatment without giving him her reasons or a chance to explain is contrary to her nature as I believe it to be. Tell her that I have thus, to a certain degree, disobeyed her injunctions in the hope that she may yet be inclined to see justice done. Go and tell her that." The young man dropped a $50 into the boy's hand. The boy looked at him for a moment with bright, canny eyes out of a dirty, intelligent face, and then set off at a run. He approached the lady on the bench a little doubtfully but unembarrassed. He touched the brim of the old plaid bicycle cap perched on the back of his head. The lady looked at him coolly, without prejudice or favor. "Lady," he said, "that gent on the other bench sent you a song and dance by me. If you don't know the guy, and he's trying to do the Johnny act, say the word, and I'll call a cop in 3 minutes. If you does know him and he's on the square, I'll spill you the bunch of hot air he sent you." The young lady betrayed a faint interest. "A song and dance," she said, in a deliberate, sweet voice that seemed to clothe her words in a diaphanous garment of impalpable irony. "A new idea? In the troubadour line, I suppose. I used to know the gentleman who sent you, so I think it will hardly be necessary to call the police. You may execute your song and dance, but do not sing too loudly. It is a little early yet for open-air vaudeville, and we might attract attention." "Or," said the boy, with a shrug down the length of him, "you know what I mean, lady. 'Tain't a turn, it's wind. He told me to tell you he's got his collars and cuffs in that grip for a scoot clean out to Frisco. Then he's going to shoot snowbirds into Klondike. He says you told him not to send round no more pink notes nor come hanging over the garden gate, and he takes this means of putting you wise. He says you refereed him out like a has-been and never give him no chance to kick at the decision. He says you swiped him and never said why." The slightly awakened interest in the young lady's eyes did not abate. Perhaps it was caused by either the originality or the audacity of the snowbird hunter in thus circumventing her express commands against the ordinary modes of communication. She fixed her eye on a statue standing disconsolate in the dishevelled park and spoke into the transmitter. "Tell the gentleman that I need not repeat to him a description of my ideals. He knows what they have been and what they still are. So far as they touch on this case, absolute loyalty and truth are the ones paramount. Tell him that I have studied my own heart as well as one can, and I know its weakness as well as I do its needs. That is why I declined to hear his pleas, whatever they may be. I did not condemn him through hearsay or doubtful evidence, and that is why I made no charge. But since he persists in hearing what he already well knows, you may convey the matter. Tell him that I entered the conservatory that evening from the rear to cut a rose for my mother. Tell him I saw him and Miss Ashburton beneath the pink oleander. The tableau was pretty, but the pose and juxtaposition were too eloquent and evident to require explanation. I left the conservatory and at the same time the rose and my ideal. You may carry that song and dance to your impresario. I'm shy on one word, lady. Jux jux. Put me wise on dat, will ya? Juxtaposition, or you may call it propinquity, or if you like, being rather too near for one maintaining the position of an ideal. The gravel spun from beneath the boy's feet. He stood by the other bench. The man's eyes interrogated him hungrily. The boy's were shining with the impersonal zeal of the translator. "De lady says that she's on to the fact that gals is dead easy when a fella comes spieling ghost stories and trying to make up, and that's why she won't listen to no soft soap. She says she caught you dead to rights, hugging a bunch of calico in the hothouse. She sidestepped in to pull some posies, and you was squeezing the older gal to beat the band. She says it looked cute, all right, but it made her sick. She says you're better get busy and make a sneak for the train." The young man gave a low whistle, and his eyes flashed with a sudden thought. His hand flew to the inside pocket of his coat and drew out a handful of letters. Selecting one, he handed it to the boy, following it with a silver dollar from his vest pocket. "Give that letter to the lady," he said, "and ask her to read it. Tell her that it should explain the situation. Tell her that if she had mingled a little trust with her conception of the ideal, much heartache might have been avoided. Tell her that the loyalty she prizes so much has never wavered. Tell her I am waiting for an answer." The messenger stood before the lady. "De Jant says he's had de ski bunk put on him without no cause. He says he's no bum guy. And lady, you read dat letter, and I'll bet yer he's a white sport, all right." The young lady unfolded the letter, somewhat doubtfully, and read it. "Dear Dr. Arnold, I want to thank you for your most kind and opportune aid to my daughter last Friday evening when she was overcome by an attack of her old heart trouble in the conservatory at Mrs. Waldron's reception. Had you not been near to catch her as she fell and to render proper attention, we might have lost her. I would be glad if you would call and undertake the treatment of her case. Gratefully yours, Robert Ashburton." The young lady refolded the letter and handed it to the boy. "De Jant wants an answer," said the messenger. "What's the word?" The lady's eyes suddenly flashed on him, bright, smiling, and wet. "Tell that guy on the other bench," she said with a happy, tremulous laugh, "that his girl wants him.